Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep on something I think we all grapple with, extrication.
Hmm.
You know, that feeling of being stuck and all the strategies we use to kind of get ourselves free, whether it's, from a bad habit or just
Mhm.
a situation that isn't really working anymore.
Yeah.
And you guys have given us some really thought-provoking answers to our extrication prompts. So
Yeah. It's fascinating stuff.
I can't wait to unpack them with our expert on all things personal growth. So
Let's dive in.
let's jump in. Okay, you mentioned gaming as an escape from stress,
Yeah.
especially when you need to cool off and maybe not take things out on others.
Yeah.
Right.
It's interesting, how this connects to the idea of replacement behaviors and habit formation.
Okay.
Oftentimes when we try to quit something cold turkey, the void it leaves can be just overwhelming.
Right.
Like Charles Duhigg talks about in The Power of Habit. It's not just about stopping the bad habit, but it's finding a new routine
Yeah.
to slot into its place.
So it's less about extricating from the habit itself and more about redirecting that energy behind it.
Exactly. And what's so fascinating is you've already identified a healthier replacement
Okay.
with those home workouts that you've been incorporating. It's like you intuitively understand this need to channel that energy elsewhere.
Yeah. Speaking of channeling energy, you talked about how you approach leaving situations that are no longer serving you.
Right.
And you seem to take a very methodical, almost pros and cons list approach.
Yeah.
You even consider how your exit will affect others.
I do. That really resonated with me. It reminds me of the emotional bank account concept from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. By considering the impact on others, you're essentially making sure you're not, overdrawing from that account when you make a change.
Oh, interesting.
And that speaks volumes about your emotional intelligence.
It's like you're approaching extrication with a sense of responsibility, not just for yourself, but for those ripple effects it creates.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, which leads perfectly into your story about losing your wallet at the airport.
Oh, gosh, yeah,
What struck me wasn't the kindness of the stranger who returned it,
right.
but your lingering feeling of awkwardness, almost like you wanted to express more gratitude.
Yeah,
You know?
that's such a human response.
Yeah.
And it ties into this complex dance
Yeah.
between giving and receiving.
Okay.
Sometimes, receiving can feel more vulnerable than giving,
Oh, interesting.
especially when it's unexpected.
Yeah.
It can trigger a feeling of indebtedness, like we now owe this person something.
Right, right. And as you've shown us, you're very conscious of that emotional balance
Really?
in your interactions. Now, let's talk about your advice for people who feel stuck. Your suggestion to do absolutely nothing seems almost counterintuitive in our always-on world,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Like go, 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 go.
But there's such wisdom in stillness.
Okay.
It's like hitting pause on a chaotic movie.
Mm.
Suddenly, you can see the individual frames, the nuances that you miss when it's all rushing by.
Oh, wow.
So think of it as extricating yourself from that mental clutter so you can actually gain clarity.
So rather than frantically searching for solutions, sometimes the answer is to stop searching altogether.
Sometimes, yeah. It's in that stillness that our true needs and desires often surface.
Mm.
It's like creating a vacuum. Something has to rush in to fill it.
It's funny you mention a vacuum because you specifically mention how gaming can be your go-to escape when things get tough.
Yeah. And that's perfectly normal. But it's like putting a Band-Aid on a deeper wound. The relief is temporary and the underlying issue remains unaddressed.
Okay.
This idea of extrication challenges us to go beyond those surface level fixes and confront what's truly holding us back.
So it's about becoming aware of our own patterns and whether they're truly serving us, they're just keeping us comfortably numb.
Yeah, I like that. Comfortably numb.
This brings us to a theme that weaves through a lot of your answers, loyalty.
You've highlighted the importance of being loyal to oneself, even when it means making choices that others might not understand.
It's like that classic oxygen mask analogy.
Right.
You have to secure your own oxygen mask before you can help others. Loyalty to oneself isn't selfish. It's essential for personal growth and well-being.
And you also mentioned that failing to try is a greater betrayal of oneself than simply failing.
Absolutely. That speaks to the courage it takes to extricate from the fear of failure.
Hmm.
It's about acknowledging that growth happens outside our comfort zones, that even if we don't succeed in the traditional sense, the act of trying itself is a victory.
Yeah. It's like you're saying the real stuckness isn't the failure, but the fear that keeps us from even starting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you talked about dealing with people who might hold you back from growth.
Right.
What I found interesting was your approach, you know, seeking to understand their perspective before making any decisions about the relationship. It's so easy to label people as toxic or holding us back, but often their behavior stems from their own insecurities and limitations.
Right.
Sometimes, simply understanding where they're coming from can shift the entire dynamic.
So it's less about judging them and more about understanding the motivations behind their actions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that understanding can help us navigate those relationships with more compassion,
Okay.
even if it ultimately leads to a decision to create more distance.
So even in the act of extricating from a relationship, there's a level of empathy and understanding that guides that process.
hmm
Finally, you described your low-energy approach to deciding when to persevere and when to quit,
Yeah,
emphasizing efficiency and avoiding ego battles.
this resonated with me deeply. It's about recognizing that our energy is a finite resource.
Right.
We need to be strategic about how we invest it. Sometimes the most empowering act of extrication is choosing to walk away from battles that drain our energy and focus on what truly matters.
So it's not about giving up, but rather about consciously choosing where we want to direct our energy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that our energy is a precious resource and we need to be wise stewards of it. And sometimes walking away is the most efficient and empowering choice,
Right.
freeing up that energy for pursuits that are more aligned with our values and goals.
Yeah. It's like that old saying, choose your battles wisely.
Exactly. And choosing to not engage in a battle is sometimes the wisest choice of all.
It's almost a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah,
This idea that extrication can be both a proactive choice and an act of surrender.
it is. It speaks to a deeper level of self-awareness,
Yeah.
recognizing when to push forward and when to just let go.
This reminds me of something else you mentioned, the importance of uh, setting boundaries and advocating for yourself while still maintaining healthy relationships.
Right.
That can be such a delicate balance.
It is. It requires clear communication and a willingness to assert our needs, even when it feels uncomfortable. It's also about recognizing that sometimes, even with the best intentions, relationships can evolve in ways that no longer serve us.
So how do we know when it's time to walk away from a relationship, even one that we've invested a lot of time and energy in?
That's a deeply personal decision, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
But I think it comes down to a few key considerations.
Mm-hmm.
First, is the relationship consistently draining your energy or bringing you down?
Okay.
Second, have you communicated your needs and boundaries clearly,
Uh-huh.
and have those been respected?
Yeah.
And third, do you see a path for growth and positive change within the relationship?
Those are really insightful questions to ask ourselves. It's so easy to get caught up in the history of a relationship and lose sight of whether it's actually contributing to our well-being in the present moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's also important to remember that walking away from a relationship doesn't have to be this dramatic or adversarial process.
Right.
It can be done with grace and compassion, acknowledging the value that the relationship once held, while also recognizing that it's time to move on.
You've touched on the concept of ego in your responses, particularly when it comes to deciding when to fight and when to let go. It seems like you see letting go as a way to kind of avoid unnecessary ego battles.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in that approach.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, our ego gets entangled in situations that don't ultimately serve us.
Uh-huh.
We might cling to a belief, a goal, or even a relationship because we've invested so much of our identity in it.
Yeah.
But true growth often requires us to loosen our grip on the ego and allow ourselves to detach from what's no longer serving us.
So it's almost like extricating ourselves from our own ego's attachments.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that our ego is not who we are.
Right.
It's a part of us, but it doesn't have to control us.
This makes me think about how you, describe yourself as a low-energy guy and how your brain needs to be as efficient as possible. It's almost like you've developed a system for extricating yourself from unnecessary mental and emotional burdens.
I think it's essential, especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information and stimuli.
Right.
It's so easy to feel overwhelmed and depleted if we're not mindful of how we're expending our energy.
So what are some practical tips for managing our energy more effectively when it comes to this idea of extrication?
Well, first and foremost, it's about awareness, paying attention to how different activities, people, and environments impact our our energy levels.
Yeah.
Once we have a better understanding of what drains us and what energizes us,
Mm-hmm.
we can start to make more conscious choices about how we spend our time.
It's like creating an energy budget for ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just like with a financial budget, we need to be mindful of where we're investing our resources and where we uh, might need to cut back.
You've also spoken about the importance of rest and stillness as ways to replenish our energy. It seems counterintuitive in a culture that prizes busyness, but you're suggesting that sometimes the best way to extricate ourselves from depletion is to simply do nothing.
Absolutely. In a culture that often glorifies busyness and productivity,
Yeah.
it's easy to forget the restorative power of simply, doing nothing.
Right.
Whether it's meditation, spending time in nature, or just, allowing ourselves to unwind without any agenda.
Yeah.
Those moments of stillness are essential for recharging our batteries and cultivating clarity.
It's like hitting the reset button on our nervous system.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It gives our minds and bodies a chance to recalibrate and come back into balance.
So it seems that extrication isn't just about removing ourselves from external situations,
Mhm.
but also about creating internal space for stillness and reflection.
Exactly.
I
It's about
see.
creating space for ourselves to simply be without the need to do all the time.
That's such a powerful concept in a world that constantly demands our attention and action. Now, going back to relationships for a moment, you talked about how understanding someone's perspective can help us navigate challenging dynamics.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of what that might look like in practice?
Absolutely. Let's say you have a friend who's constantly complaining,
Right.
and their negativity is bringing you down. Instead of getting caught up in their negativity or withdrawing from the relationship altogether, you could try to understand where their negativity is stemming from.
So instead of judging them, I might try to see things from their perspective.
Exactly. Perhaps they're going through a difficult time, or maybe they've developed a pattern of negative thinking that they're not even aware of.
Okay.
By approaching the situation with understanding and compassion,
Mm-hmm.
you create a space for connection and healing.
It's about seeing the person behind the behavior.
Precisely. And it's about recognizing that we all have our own struggles and challenges.
But understanding doesn't necessarily mean accepting or condoning behavior that's harmful to us.
Yeah.
Right.
Understanding can help us to set healthier boundaries.
Okay.
For example, if this friend is constantly complaining,
Right.
we might need to limit our exposure to their negativity. We can still care about them and offer support, but we also have a responsibility to protect our own well-being.
So even in the context of maintaining relationships, extrication plays a role in creating healthy boundaries.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we have a right to protect our own energy and well-being, even within our closest relationships.
This reminds me of something you said earlier about failing to try being a greater betrayal of oneself than simply failing. It seems like extricating ourselves from the fear of failure is a crucial step in personal growth.
It is. It's
Yeah.
it's about recognizing that failure is an inevitable part of life,
Mm.
and that it doesn't define our worth or potential. In fact, some of our greatest lessons come from our mistakes.
It's about reframing failure as feedback.
Exactly. Instead of seeing failure as a sign of weakness or inadequacy,
Right.
we can choose to see it as an opportunity to learn, grow, and improve.
It's about adopting a growth mindset.
Precisely. A growth mindset is the belief that our abilities and intelligence can be developed through effort and learning.
Okay.
When we embrace a growth mindset, we're more likely to persevere through challenges and see setbacks as opportunities for growth.
This seems to tie back to your low energy approach.
Yeah.
It's not about avoiding challenges altogether,
Right.
but rather about choosing our battles wisely and being strategic about how we invest our energy.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that our energy is a precious resource
Yeah.
and that we need to be mindful of how we're expending it. We can't fight every battle.
Right.
And we don't have to.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most empowering choice is to walk away and focus on what truly matters.
So it seems like extrication is a multifaceted concept.
Yeah.
It's about, freeing ourselves from external constraints, like bad habits or unhealthy relationships.
Right.
But it's also about creating that internal space for stillness, reflection, and growth.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's about freeing ourselves from what's holding us back. both internally and externally,
Yeah.
so that we can live more authentically and purposefully.
You mentioned earlier that you see yourself as a low energy guy and that your brain needs to be as efficient as possible.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways you've optimized your life to align with this low energy approach?
One thing I've done is to simplify my schedule.
Mhm.
I used to overcommit myself,
Mm.
leaving little time for rest and relaxation. Now I'm much more intentional about how I spend my time. I prioritize the activities that bring me joy and energy, and I'm not afraid to say no to things that don't.
It's almost like you've extricated yourself from the pressure to be busy all the time.
Exactly. I've realized that busyness doesn't equal productivity.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'm often more productive when I allow myself time to rest and recharge.
It seems like you've also extricated yourself from certain societal expectations around success and achievement.
To some extent, yeah, I've let go of the need to constantly prove myself or achieve external validation.
Uh-huh.
I'm more focused on living a life that feels authentic and meaningful to me.
This makes me think about your point about understanding the motivations behind people's actions.
Right.
Have you ever encountered someone who seemed to be holding you back?
Uh-huh.
And through understanding their perspective, were you able to kind of shift the dynamic of the relationship?
Yes. I had a colleague who was very critical of my work.
Oh, okay.
It was really frustrating, and I felt like he was constantly trying to undermine me.
Yeah.
But instead of getting defensive, I decided to try to understand where his criticism was coming from.
So you decided to extricate yourself from the emotional reaction and approach the situation with curiosity.
Exactly. I had a conversation with him and asked him about his feedback. It turned out that he was actually insecure about his own abilities and was projecting that onto me.
Wow. That's a powerful realization. So by understanding his motivations, you were able to detach from the personal sting of his criticism.
Exactly. It allowed me to see his behavior in a new light.
Yeah.
It didn't excuse his actions, but it helped me to understand them and to respond in a way that was more compassionate and effective.
That's a great example of how understanding can be a powerful tool for extrication.
It is.
It allows us to detach from emotional reactivity and respond in a more skillful way.
It's about recognizing that people's actions are often driven by their own unmet needs and insecurities. When we can understand that,
Right.
it becomes easier to navigate challenging situations with more compassion and clarity.
This whole conversation has really got me thinking about the different levels of extrication.
Yeah.
It's not just about, physically removing ourselves from situations,
Right.
but also about shifting our perspectives and managing our energy in a way that supports our well-being.
It's about creating space for ourselves to live more authentically and purposefully.
Yeah.
It's about freeing ourselves from what's holding us back so that we can embrace what truly matters.
It feels like we've been talking about extrication on this macro level so far, habits, relationships, even our own thought patterns.
Yeah.
But what about those everyday moments where we just feel stuck,
Mm.
you know?
Those little snags are just as important. It's like decluttering a room.
Okay.
Sometimes you got to tackle the junk drawer before you can see the bigger picture.
So how do we apply this idea of extrication to those smaller, more mundane situations?
It's about becoming aware of the subtle ways we get entangled.
Okay.
Maybe it's procrastinating on a task because it just feels overwhelming,
Right.
or getting sucked into an endless, social media scroll, even though we have other things to do.
So it's about recognizing those moments where our energy is being diverted,
Yeah,
even in seemingly insignificant ways.
exactly. And then it's about asking ourselves, what would it take to extricate myself from this right now?
Mm.
Maybe it's setting a timer for 15 minutes of focused work,
Okay.
or putting your phone in another room.
Right. It's like those micro extrications kind of create a ripple effect,
They do.
freeing up mental and emotional space for the bigger challenges.
Precisely. And as we practice extricating ourselves from those smaller snags, we build that mental muscle
Right.
to tackle those more complex situations.
This whole conversation has really highlighted the importance of being intentional with our energy. It's
Yeah.
almost like we've been given this finite amount,
Yeah.
and it's up to us to decide where we invest it.
It is.
Speaking of investments, you've talked about how failing to try is a greater betrayal of oneself than simply failing.
It is.
It seems like that takes a certain level of trust,
It does.
both in ourselves and in the process of life.
It does. It's about recognizing that growth rarely follows a straight path.
Right.
There'll be detours, roadblocks, even U-turns. But as long as we're moving forward, even if it's in a different direction than we originally planned,
Yeah.
we're still making progress.
So it's less about having all the answers and more about trusting our ability to navigate the unknown.
Exactly. And to be open to the possibility that that the failures along the way might actually lead us to something even better than we initially imagined.
Hmm. This makes me think about your emphasis on understanding different perspectives, even in challenging situations.
Hmm.
It seems like that requires a certain level of detachment from our own emotional reactions.
It does. It's about recognizing that our emotions, while valid,
Right.
don't always reflect the whole picture. Sometimes we need to step back from our own emotional experience and try to see things from a different angle.
So it's like extricating ourselves from the grip of our own emotions so that we
Yeah.
can respond more thoughtfully.
Exactly. It's not about suppressing our emotions, but rather about creating space
Okay.
between the emotion and our response.
Right.
That space allows for more clarity, more compassion, and ultimately more effective action.
It seems like this concept of extrication applies not just to external situations, but also to our own, internal world, our
Absa.
thoughts, our beliefs, even our identities.
True growth often involves uh, extricating ourselves from limiting beliefs or self-sabotaging patterns.
Right.
It's about uh, questioning the stories we tell ourselves and being willing to rewrite them if they're no longer serving us.
It's like we're constantly evolving, and sometimes that means shedding old versions of ourselves to make room for the new.
Exactly. And that process of shedding can be uh, uncomfortable, even painful at times.
Right.
But it's through that discomfort that we often experience the greatest breakthroughs.
You've talked about your low energy approach and how you prioritize efficiency.
I do.
It seems like that mindset is also a form of extrication,
That is.
freeing yourself from the pressure to do everything and be everything.
It is. It's about recognizing that our energy is a finite resource
Hmm.
and that we need to be mindful of how we expend it. For me, that means being selective about my commitments,
Okay.
focusing on what truly matters, and letting go of the need to please everyone.
So it's about creating a life that's aligned with your values and priorities rather than trying to conform to external expectation.
Exactly. And that, I think, is the essence of extrication.
Hmm.
Creating a life that feels authentic and liberating, free from the constraints that hold us back from living fully.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive into extrication.
It has.
Exploring its various dimensions and how it can help us navigate the complexities of life.
It's a concept that's both practical and profound,
Yeah.
offering us tools to create a life that's more aligned with our true selves.
As we wrap up, I'd like to leave you with a final thought. What area of your life could benefit from a little extrication? What needs to be disentangled, let go of, or shifted to create space for something new to emerge?
Take some time to reflect on that question and see what insights arise. Remember, extrication is a journey, not a destination. Be patient with yourself, trust the process, and enjoy the freedom that comes with letting go.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.